Jim Sutton, Director Advocacy with I.E.Canada, the Canadian Association of Importers and Exporters. I'm joined by Aaron Gilmore, Manager, ARL Support, Finance, Administration, Systems and Policies with the Canada Border Services Agency. Aaron will walk through the Accounts Receivable Ledger, ARL Accounts Balance Overview Report for Importers. Aaron?
Thanks, Jim. I thought I'd start off just by giving a quick sort of overview of the purpose of this report. It's sort of an interim measure to ensure that importers are able to reconcile credit, be they payments, or various other credits that are applied to the account, B2s in particular. So I'll sort of give a brief overview today of the information that we're sending out, the format, and how the various data fields can be used to actually determine, some additional reconciliation information. The first column is fairly self-explanatory. Unfortunately, we couldn't change the name, but the traffic light simply indicates the status of the document. Generally, the three core ones that people will see there will either be credit open or receivable open, receivable paid, or receivable open not yet due. In certain other limited circumstances, certain individuals may see statuses like reversed and a few others. Those are generally internal administrative things where reversal might have been misapplied credit, or credit was applied to the incorrect account. The cashier went in and simply chose to reverse that and reapplied the credit to the correct account. The open and paid are fairly self-explanatory. The major difference between the open and open not yet due is an open credit would be one that is currently past due, i.e. its due date occurred prior to the day when the report was generated. The receivable open not yet due would generally be for items that are applied during the current billing cycle. So anything coming due at the end of this current period at the beginning of May, you would likely expect to see a receivable open not yet due with the due date of May 1st. The next column that you see is the reference document number. These are the external document numbers. I'll sort of touch on a document number in a clearing document and why there's a reference document number field here. However, generally what you would expect to see in this column here would be the B2, B3 transaction numbers. In certain cases where a monetary penalty was issued or a K-23, a miscellaneous invoice was issued, you would also see the file number of those, the file number of the drawback, basically any sort of external reference number that you would find on the forms. One important thing to note is for items that you would see a cash desk description, and I'll touch on those in a minute. If you do see a reference document number, like you see in the second row here, what that indicates on a payment document was that that cash payment was meant to be applied to the receivable where the numbers match. So in cases where an importer has filed cash B3s and they have remitted payment, you can do things like group by the reference document number to see if the payment was applied to the account and if the payment was applied correctly. Generally, what we found in certain cases was the payment was applied, however it was applied as a general credit and not for a specific receivable, and has offsets and other things. If this is the case where that has happened, the importer can simply remit proof of payment, i.e. a stamped B3 or B2, to the current mailbox, and we'll more than happily sort of rectify that issue for them. The next field, the clearing document, is an internal SAP document number. Excuse me. What you expect to see in this column, and it's a little confusing, but where the number and the value in this field, it will match credits to receivables. So if the receivable is closed and the payment has been used, this is the field that you can do a group or a filter by, and it will show you how credits offset certain items. So if you're wondering where did my $10,000 B2 go, and there's a clearing document in this field for that B2, you can simply do a filter on that clearing document number, and it will show you the receivables that were paid with that credit. In certain cases, the receivable that was paid might be of a document type or a description of outgoing payment. This simply indicates that the item was dispersed. If the item does not have a clearing document number, like you see in the first row here, you can also see that the amount is still open. This means that that check payment has not been used, that has not been used to offset any receivables, that has not been dispersed, and that credit is still available. The next column is fairly self-explanatory. The description, it simply indicates whether the document is a B2, a B3, You can see certain things like refund payments, monetary penalties. The fields that require this sort of most explanation would be simply the check lot field and the cash desk field. You may also see payment lot. What these simply mean is a check lot was a check was remitted for payment. A cash desk is an actual cash or credit card transaction. And the payment lot, which does cause some confusion, simply means that a payment was remitted at a non-ARL payment site, i.e. an office that didn't have ARL payment processing, and the payment was recorded and then transferred to another office for processing. Of note, for the monetary penalties NK23s, a physical copy of that invoice should have also been received by the importer. So if they have not received those, you should contact the office and determine what had happened to those documents. But fundamentally, for anything with an individual invoice and a different due date, physical copies should still be issued to the importer and the agent if an agent is specified on the document. The main transaction will generally be 8,000 for any sorts of payments. Where it becomes more relevant and useful is if you look at B2 and B3 documents, the numbers will change. On the second page, which we'll get to a little bit later, there is an actual key for these values that indicates whether the line item is duty, Special Important Measures Act, GST, or a variety of other sort of categories of tax. It's important to note that in certain cases that you will sort of note over here with the reference document numbers, each line in the spreadsheet is not simply one B3 document. It is a line item on the B3 document. So you would expect to see things where the reference document number is the same on both lines. You would expect to see a different main transaction. So that would indicate the first line of the B3 where the item was 100 would be the duty portion of the B3. Where it was 0400, that would indicate that it was the GST portion of the B3. The local currency amount is relatively self-explanatory. That was the initial value of the payment document, B2, B3 line item for those, which correlates to the still open. If the still open has a value, it may be somewhere between 0 and the full value. If it is 0, it means the item has been used, i.e. the item was offset, the receivable was paid, the credit was used. If it is still open and 100% is still open, that means there's still credit available to the importer. Or the payment has not been matched with this corresponding document. In certain cases, the item may be somewhere between 0 and the full value of the payment document. What this means is a partial clearing has occurred, i.e. half of the B2 may have been used to pay outstanding debt and has left half of the B2 value for offsetting in the subsequent month or disbursement. The posting date indicates the date that the document was posted to the financial system, so you can determine which cycle the item was posted in. This will generally occur somewhere between the 25th of the month and the 24th of the subsequent month, which will then generate a due date, which should correspond to the end of the current payment cycle. This will hold true for B3s. Most of the B2s will have a due date of the 25th. Due to how clearing and offsetting programs work. Various other items like monetary penalties, as you can see here, will generally, and notes penalties, K23s, will all have due dates 30 days from the posting date. So effectively, when the invoice was generated, there's a 30-day period for which they can remit interest-free. The broker column is a bit of a misnomer. It identifies brokers who had submitted the transaction or consultants. So if the importer is working with a customs consultant who files their adjustments, drawbacks, and a variety of other documents, you may see a value there. In most cases, the broker value will correspond to the first 5 digits of the document that was submitted on the B3, B2, and you should be able to determine the account security. If the importer is unable to determine who the broker corresponds to, these are not the account security values or business numbers of those brokers. It's an internal SAP number. So if an importer does have questions, they can feel free to contact the CARM inbox with that, and we will be able to provide them the corresponding mapping of which agent, be it broker or consultant, corresponds to that value. The next 4 columns, clearing locks, buying locks, interest locks, and payment locks, are applied to indicate, just to provide some insight to importers as to why items may still be sitting open on the account, why various credits may not have been disbursed. And in order, the clearing lock is generally used during an appeals process. This prevents a receivable from having a credit applied against it to offset it. This will sort of keep it in stasis and until the issue is resolved. Once that lock is removed, then credits can be applied against it. The dunning lock similarly also prevents items from being sent to collection. So during an appeals process or something of the sort, a lock may be applied and simply just prevent that from being sent to collections for action. The interest lock reason, again, generally applied during appeals processes, prevents interest from being accumulated on the document, or if an interest waiver has been granted, we'll put that lock on the document, and that'll prevent a receivable from accruing interest. Finally, the payment lock reason, which sounds like the initial clearing lock reason, is a little bit confusing, but it references outgoing payments from the CBSA to importers. This payment lock will prevent a check from being dispersed. Generally, we expect to see values in this column that if a check was issued and the check was returned to us because the address was incorrect, somebody had done a return to sender, or the party had simply been confused and felt that the check should have been delivered to them and they returned it to the CBSA/Public Works. You would expect to see an I value in that column. Simply that means that the credit was returned to the account, the check was refunded, and the credit is now sitting there. However, it requires corrective action, i.e. the address needs to be updated, or we need to check with the importer to ensure that clarify why the check was returned. Finally, the grouping key column. This column is generally used to indicate one of a few things. The CA flag will indicate cash B3s and will be used to group and match payments and receivables, i.e. B3s and their corresponding payments should both be tagged with a CA to ensure that they offset each other. PP will be applied to payments for B2s. So if you do show up when you submit the B2 and pay the B2 in advance, the corresponding payment to ensure that it should offset the corresponding B2 should have a PP value in that column. If it does not, that may explain why the B2 is still sitting open and unpaid on the report. Of note, if the importer is a member of the GST deferral program or the importer direct security program, the various items that were submitted with those flags by the broker on their behalf, you would expect to see a G item on the GST line items, but not on the duty and SEMA. So referencing the main transactions here, you would expect to see a G on the 100 line item, or pardon me, a G on the 400 line items, but no Gs on the 100 line items. In the case of the importer direct security program, you would expect to see Is on all three line items of the transaction if they were there. So the duty, the SEMA, and the GST portion. That simply indicates that those items are the importer's liability and no longer the broker's. On the second page of the document that we send, just provides a brief sort of overview. As mentioned, it provides some details about the locks and the explanation that I just gave about the locks. The grouping keys are indicated below, the G and the I that I discussed, the cash B3s, the prepaid B2s. RE is seen a little bit less frequently, but that's a remission where the value between the actual B2 that the importer submitted, where they owed the CBSA, let's say $200, and it was determined after the B2 was processed, the actual amount due was $204.38. You would expect to see the $4.38 line item as a remission, effectively because it was below the $7.50 threshold that was established. The remainder of the columns will show the actual values that you see there. As you can see, for dunning locks, you can see an A for appealed, a G for section 97.2 or a notice of lien, H indicating that the item, when it was appealed, was secured via a bond and not actually paid. Similarly for clearing locks, there's a list of reasons. If clients importers do have questions about the locks and what the locks mean and why a lock may have been applied to one of their receivables or payments, again, they can feel free to contact the Farm Inbox. I'm more than happy to sort of provide a quick answer related to why that lock may have been applied on those items. Payment locks, as you can see, generally we'll see SPSIS cancellation that I discussed for the I. There are a few other reasons, but generally the one that we expect to see is I for that. Similarly for clearing locks, you wouldn't see those very, very often. However, sort of in review or in dispute would be the two major ones that you would see. Interest locks, again, secured late in review. Similarly, one would expect to see, the appeal reasons or the in review or in dispute for an interest lock being applied. And certainly in other circumstances, we may just simply apply an interest lock to determine what's going on with that, and one of the other reasons may be there. And finally, the list of main transactions. This lists all of the line items. As mentioned, the B3s may have multiple line items, where for each document you expect to see one of these main transactions for each, indicating the duty line item on the B3, the SEMA line item, the excise tax, GST, HST. Similarly, for other receivables, 1,000 will indicate a penalty, 2,000 can be used to determine interest documents, 3,000 for drawbacks, et cetera, et cetera. Those can be used to sort of group and sort through the documents as well to determine if there are any open items and what categories they fall into, and do a bit of reporting against those values. So with that, that concludes the overview of the ARL account balance. Hopefully listeners find this beneficial and clarifies any questions they may have. As I've mentioned a few times throughout the presentation, however, should you have questions, you can contact the current inbox, and we will more than happily sort of provide any additional clarification required or explanations about how items reconcile the various rationales. James?
Thank you, Aaron. We trust the information that you just provided will prove helpful to importers and their service providers in understanding and managing importers' companies' money and that relates to their importations. Thank you very much.